Welcome to the Salt of the Earth podcast. This is episode 10, and I am your host, Thomas Pope. This is my co-host,
Jonathan Cobb.
Today, we are going to be reviewing not one, but two videos, and also talking about our normal, regular topic. So the first video that we're going to be talking about is one that Jonathan made, which was, Should Christians be involved with politics?
Yes. And I want to start off by saying I got a little nervous making this video because I know it contradicted some beliefs that I've previously had, probably, but and beliefs that I know other people have. And it's actually inspired off a sermon that I heard, but not in the way you might think.
What way am I supposed to think?
You don't have to.
Oh, okay. I just won't.
Yeah. So I made this video. Well, it's going to be posted like 3 weeks ago now, but I made the video a little while ago. And I wrote this little teaser question for as a kind of like a intro to this video, and I'll just read it. So, if you were in a foreign country that you knew from a reputable source was going to be nuked into oblivion at some point, you don't know when, would you focus on trying to fix all the problems of this country and make it a good place to live? Or would you focus on trying to get people out of there?
And that's how you started your video.
That's how I started my video. And the reason I wrote it that way is because I thought that is a very good comparison to how it is on Earth.
Right. So, because we're not in a country that's going to get nuked, but rather a universe and a planet and a universe that are going to melt.
Yeah. It's basically the same thing as getting nuked for all we care, for all that matters.
Yeah. For the points of illustration, it works fine.
And notice that I said foreign country. That's important. This is not our own country.
It's not our homeland.
And notice that, so it's from a reputable source. So we know for sure that this country is going to get destroyed.
We just don't know when.
And we don't know when. But we know it's going to happen. And so basically the reason I asked this question is to point out the fact that why should we care how this country goes?
Mm-hmm. And that was the entire point of your video was essentially, we should not put so much care and thought and arguments into what happens physically here on Earth and specifically like what's happening in our country politically, because in the end it doesn't really matter. Yeah. Which is the point you're essentially making.
Mm-hmm. And I think it goes so far as to say it distracts us from our real goal.
Right. And I would make the specification that you were talking about specifically. We should not put a lot of focus into those for the purpose of saving the country or saving the world.
Yeah, or fixing it, or improving it, or making it a better place to live.
Because that really has no... it doesn't really have a meaningful effect on eternity. That's not to say that people can... I guess you didn't really make the point that people shouldn't at all get into politics. It was more they shouldn't for that reason. Or am I...
Yeah, that's correct.
Correct?
And one point of the video, I made this distinction. I think there's a difference between getting into politics for the desires of this world versus getting it to be like the salt and light, for instance. Mm-hmm. I'll read it. So what it comes down to, though, is this question. Is trying to influence the government come from a place of trying to please God or a place of worldly desire? It could be either, and I think it's up for each person to decide where that line is. For me, personally, I think it's believe something like speaking out against abortion is something that's being the salt and light, like we're commanded to do. However, if you want to get involved in politics so you can leave a better country for your children and grandchildren, where does that desire come from?
So yeah, there you make the distinction that it depends largely on what your motive is and what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And notice that I use the. Have you ever listened to a speech, and I'm sure you've heard this taxation is going to leave a huge burden on our children and grandchildren. Mm-hmm. That line is like the thrown around so much, and everybody uses it, especially Christians.
Um,
And I want
especially politicians, really.
well, like it's a line that we use because we think we want to think of it. We want to use a motive that's higher than ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And that's children and grandchildren.
Yeah, and I'm trying to make the point that even that's not a good enough motive.
That's not a good motive.
Yeah.
Well, doing something for your children and grandchildren for their lives is not a good motive. Doing something to improve their eternal outcome, that's a different matter.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a thing that is thrown around a lot, especially I think of like things like global warming or open borders, or think there's a lot of topics like this where that I think is especially used, where it's like, if you can't do it for yourself, at least do it for your children and grandchildren. Give them a better world.
Yeah.
So the main point you were making is essentially, well, our goal is not to give them a better world than this world, because it's never going to really be better.
Yeah.
We need to be focusing and teaching them to long for the next world, which is going to be better or much worse, depending on how ready they are.
And I like to think, that verse, you must hate your family and your own life.
If anyone does not
yeah.
hate his own father and mother, brother and sister, yes, and even his own life. And I'm not sure if that's an exact quote, but yes, and even his own life, he cannot follow me, I think.
Yeah, and I think the point of that verse is that we don't put our family above like our walk with God.
Mm-hmm. It's not saying you have to hate your family. It's saying, compared to how much you are devoted to and love Christ, compared to that, your love for your family is like hate.
Yeah.
It's in comparison, you would give up your family and all your possessions and everything for Christ.
Yeah, and so I like to think this verse applies here when I say this, is that, if you're choosing politics over pursuing Christ because you want to leave a better country for your children and grandchildren, that's going against that verse.
Mm-hmm. Which I think a lot of people who, Christians who do care a lot about politics and talk about it and even try to get involved in it, I don't usually think that is their motive, at least not consciously.
Yeah.
I think their motive is that they want to, have it, make a more moral country or something like that.
Yeah.
But often it either comes across as not being that way, or they're really not actually.
Well, and they might start out that way, then they get just swept up in it, and then they end up just being like everybody else who's in politics,
mm-hmm.
which is not necessarily bad by worldly standards. I'm just saying it's not our main focus.
Mm-hmm.
So you could go into the good focus, or you could be, or I believe people that go into politics to try to make this world a better place are somewhat misguided, because that's not the best way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
The best way to do that is to make disciples and to strengthen the church, because who's leading this country is not going to influence the moral culture of this country.
Mm-hmm.
It's the activity of the church that's going to influence the morality of this country.
Yep.
And so either way, even if you are going into good motives, I think you're somewhat misguided to do that if you're going to get heavily involved to try to change the moral framework of the country, because it's not the best way to do it.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say it's misguided. See, I'm of the opinion where, so say hypothetically, like I was going to run for a political position, or eventually like I was going to try to become president or something like that, I would do it for moral reasons and to be the kind of spiritual leader that I would think the country would need. And I would think that in that kind of case, with that kind of motive and that goal, that's not such a bad thing.
Yeah.
So I guess our opinions slightly differ on that. Is that I would think. See, I have no problem with getting into politics as long as, or someone getting into politics or being highly invested in it, as long as their motive is right, which and as long as it's not a distraction.
Yeah, and I don't know what the line is. I mean, the line could be different for different people, and maybe you're called to get into politics. I mean, each person has their own calling,
mm-hmm.
and
we can't judge other people's motives.
Yeah.
So what I would say though is, what I often see Christians doing, which is sitting around after church or before church, or even during sermons sometimes, arguing about politics and mentioning how the whole world is broken and is going down, and they spend all their time basically complaining about politics and what's happening. That I don't like because, well, first of all, it's just complaining. They're very rarely do I hear those kind of conversations and then someone switches it and asks the question, okay, so since this is what the world is like, what are we going to do about it? Very rarely do I hear that the conversation switch to thinking about what we can do as Christians to counteract all the brokenness and evil in the world.
Yeah.
So that's what gets me, is that many times my own family, I've been part of this, and other Christians who I know, they'll sit around talking and complaining about the country and politics, and then nothing will happen, and they'll just do it again and again and again. Nothing comes of it. It's a big distraction, and I think they almost find entertainment in it, I think.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, or I said in my videos, that this is the background I grew up in, and I'm trying to change that in my own life.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of the point of this video. So I agree with you. I'm in the same boat. I've been in those discussions.
Well, I know that's like the thing my family does, like every Sunday morning before church, is talks about that kind of stuff, and it. And I was just thinking, it's been a while since I've been back home, but like it'd be weird to go back and then be in it again and like, I didn't actually miss this part because it's pointless when you come down to it. It's a bunch of people complaining in a way that somehow pats themselves on their back because they are not the evil.
They're not the villain in their story.
Yeah, they're not the ones they're complaining about. I don't know. So it's a good thought, though, when you think about really, and this was a new idea to me within just the past couple of years, is that for every area of your life, you should be choosing your beliefs and how you act or talk about it based on your spiritual beliefs. And politics, you should be choosing what you believe, who you vote for, or if you vote. And how much you are involved based on your faith. And if voting for a certain person or getting more involved is not in line with your faith, you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And
even if you think that your candidate is going to improve this country or going to fix problems we have, even then.
Yeah. So if there's something wrong with their moral character, you think they're not going to push the country right in a moral direction, then maybe you shouldn't vote for them. And it's kind of weird that this was a new idea to me within the past couple of years, because I remember I had a friend who mentioned that I'm not going to mention any names, but mentioned that a candidate was really stupid because of their policy on like immigration and stuff. And the reason he had for that was because America is the best place for us to disciple to and have relationships and share Christianity with Muslims and people from third world countries, and refugees and things like that. If they come here to a place where there's a lot of religious freedom, that's the best place for them to encounter Christianity. Whereas in their own countries, it's illegal and they'd be killed for it. And so they had that perspective. And at the time, I was like, oh, well, that's stupid. Like, I like that candidate. I couldn't wrap my head around it. But then later on I was thinking, it's like, they were choosing that based on spiritual beliefs and convictions. And what was I choosing mine on? I was choosing mine on what I'd heard, growing up in my family, and what I thought was the best choice economically, what would be best for the country. And then I'm like, that doesn't really make sense to think that way. That's not the way I should be thinking or voting based on economics.
Yeah. And I think it is an important point, like that we don't. Well, I did make a point of not mentioning parties or names in this video, because the point I wanted to make with that is that it's part of the problem with being heavily invested in politics is that you can easily slip into yourself seeing that the people in the opposing party are the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's happened in my mind before. I mean, if you get too involved, it's like you start to see people that oppose you politically as wrong or all these things, like, and you make assumptions about them just because of those political beliefs.
Mm-hmm. In the same way within the church, I think, with like other denominations, you make assumptions about someone based on what church they go to, and then you're less open to talking to them.
Yeah, you create barriers with yourself before you even meet them,
and that's not good.
Yeah, and so that whole mindset is cutting off friendships, cutting off opportunities. It's causing you to dislike somebody without just for that thing alone.
And for all you know, maybe that person knows something that you don't.
I mean, at the very least,
you're never gonna know, because everything they say, you have like a wall up, and you're never gonna believe any of it.
At the very least, they're coming at it from a different perspective than you are.
Yeah.
And their perspective, they're right, and in their perspective, you're wrong. And the same with you. In my perspective, I'm always right. And so we just got
my perspective, you're always wrong.
So that's just it. So the whole idea of that's why I think it's important not to be too affiliated to parties or whatnot, is because you start to slip into seeing people that opposing you as people that are wrong,
mm-hmm.
and people that have bad motives.
Right.
Because if they're intentionally wrong, that means they have bad motives. But
so when it comes down to it, though, just when it comes to politics or work or where you live or all these kind of things, you should choose all those things based on what you believe spiritually. And that's a very radical idea that most people don't even think about, that I never thought about growing up. But when I think about it now, I'm like, oh man, like it's totally against my nature because I grew up differently. But I can't help but think like, okay, well, that's how it should be. I should be making my major life decisions and major belief choices off of my ultimate purpose and my ultimate belief, which is in Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And it's radical to think that way, but maybe we should be radical in that way.
Yeah.
Not just in every way.
Yeah.
So that was your video. Good stuff. We're also going to talk about another video, which is one that I made, which I have no idea when it came out.
Well, it came out 2 weeks ago.
Oh, did it?
Well, not this past Monday, the Monday before that.
I'm so confused.
I'm talking like.
Yeah,
I'm pretending.
I'm just so confused.
I'm pretending that this is the day that people are hearing this for the first time.
Yeah, I'm still confused.
By the way, these are pre-recorded.
No, this is live. Shut up.
Just in case you're confused.
I'm confused still. And I know that they're pre-recorded. So another video we're going to talk about is one that I made on contentment. I think I called it a new perspective or perspective of contentment, something like that, which came from some of the thoughts that I was having when studying and researching for the podcast episode on possessions and wealth, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
Just reading through verses, I came across several that, I maybe have them here, expressed we should be content with our circumstances, whatever those circumstances are, and also we should just be content given the bare necessities. And when I read those, I kind of opened my eyes a little bit, and I was forced to realize, I haven't been terribly content with a lot of areas of my life. And I would never have before said that I was a person who wasn't content. I would have thought like, oh yeah, I'm perfectly content. But after reading those verses, I was like, yeah, no, I definitely wasn't content. So one of those verses, I'll just read it because I have it written down here. 1 Timothy 6:7-9. For we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. If we have food and covering, with these we shall be content. But those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare and many foolish and harmful desires which plunge men into ruin and destruction. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the ones that kind of just spurred my line of thought on that video. And in the video, I kind of tried to, I don't know what you'd call it, role play or walk through like two perspectives someone could have.
Yeah.
So one would be the perspective which I had, and I think most people have, which is you want money to do the things that you want to do, essentially, and then you view every expense and everything that gets in the way as something that is just annoying, right?
Yeah.
That's how I viewed possessions and stuff, and then I compared that with a more content perspective where money is much more, it views money as much more of a gift, and as long as it meets the base requirements of providing for your physical needs, for feeding you and, giving you shelter, after that everything is extra. And so I just wanted to compare those two kind of perspectives because I think the latter is more what we should have as Christians.
Yeah. And I think like the perspective of having everything beyond our bare necessities is extra helps us to remember that in all these all the things that we enjoy, all the money we spend on different fun things or trips or whatever, they're a gift from God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that mindset helps us remember that, is that because basically the whole idea is that we are not working for ourselves. We are working for God.
Right.
And
everything is a gift from God.
Yeah, and God has given us the responsibility of managing the money that we have that's His.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we've decided to spend some of it on something fun, that's a gift from God.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Yeah, that's. I guess that's. If you see it that way, it should also make you more grateful for things.
And something I noticed is when I was thinking about that perspective, I found with this kind of perspective, a person would be a lot more open and willing to give and to be generous.
Yeah.
Because instead of viewing, oh no, man, if I tithe or if I give to charity or something, that's taking away from what I can do, which would be the first perspective, which is a very selfish one. Instead, with a more content perspective, it's all extra. It's all a gift anyway, so I should give to those who don't have as much as me. I just find that perspective much more open to the idea of sharing than one that is focused on ourselves.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so since it's been several weeks, I think, since I made that video, and even more weeks since I first thought about this new perspective from when we did the podcast. And so just trying to adopt that new mindset in my own life, I've found that I'm generally just a lot more at peace when it comes to stuff and money. I'm more at peace. I'm more content. I'm just happier in general when anything that comes to money. It's just like, with that perspective in mind, I just realized I already have everything I need, and it's pretty good. It's been, I I recommend you at least think through that perspective, and you read some of the passages about contentment, and just think about how you can apply them to your lives, because because I think in the end it is a kind of the key to one of the keys to peace and happiness is it's also kind of severing one more connection that we have to the world when we are no longer when we're no longer chasing after stuff, and when we're just like, God, I just trust you for the few things you have. It just kind of severs that connection we have to the world, and then we're
free from that temptation.
Free, yeah.
Yeah. I guess I should try to work on that more, because different things like wanting to find a better job or wanting to save money here or there. I mean, that all comes from a place of trying to hold on to money, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of things we do just come from a place of holding on to money or going after money. And so I guess I should work on that more, is like, remember that it's not, this doesn't belong to me anyways.
Right. And I by no means am trying to say that I have like perfectly nailed it down, because I still like, look at the numbers on my bank account or something and fret over expenses and things. Like, I'm not fully there, but I just know from being exposed to the new perspective and kind of half applying it to my life, I've seen noticeable results. And I think a more significant one than just thinking about money is with my job. I didn't think I was super, unhappy with my job, but I did fall into the trap of kind of complaining about a lot of things and just being a complainer, basically.
Yeah.
And after coming on with this perspective, I realized it could also be applied to work. And from that point on, I'm like, I was just a lot more chill and content about my job. Like, it almost like I have wanted to find another job for a while now. It almost for a while put a pause to me wanting to even search, because it's like, it's not so bad right now.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to me, because it's not, I mean, delivery driver is not what I want to be for all my life, but at the same time I can still find contentment in it, and I think that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm. And again, it comes back to the thing: if our money is God's, our time is God's. So if it's God's will that we'll make more money by working more hours or working a different job, then He can give us that prompting. And if it's God's will that we make less money and maybe spend more time on something,
Mm-hmm.
then maybe He'll prompt us to do that. So it's like, either way, it doesn't matter how much money you make, because it's not yours anyways.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter how much money it goes out, because it's not yours.
Yeah, it just doesn't terribly matter so much, and you don't care about it as much, which I think is the most significant part, is that you're not fretting over it all the time. You're just more at peace.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of like, for me, I work at like an entry-level job. Well, it's kind of entry-level, basically. And you always have that like push to work harder to get to a job that makes you feel like more like a professional, I guess. It's not so much about the money, it's more about the status, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing, is like, you know what? It doesn't matter what like my status is. If God's given me this job to serve Him with, then should be content with that.
Mm-hmm. And so it can be applied. I realize that the perspective of contentment can be applied to every area of your life, to how you view money and possessions and your work and how you spend your time. All of it. You can do all of it in a more content way.
Mm-hmm.
And I just generally think it's the way to live.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a good video. Definitely, if you apply these things, I'm sure you'll be much happier in life.
And it's one of those things where a perspective change does not necessarily always involve a major change in action or what you do, but just slightly skewing a perspective. Like when I first read some of those passages and just was thinking about it, something just kind of clicked, and all of a sudden I was like seeing the whole world from a different view, which is why we call it perspective view.
Yeah.
And it really does shift so much. Like, I didn't even make major changes in what I was doing day to day, just how I was thinking. And I was just all of a sudden, much happier about a lot of things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting thing, just perspective and how your eye views the world. Cool to think about.
Yeah.
So that is our second video that we were talking about today. We also have our main topic, which is how can we use our own unique God-given talents.
Talents.
Why are we repeating talents?
You repeated it again.
Oh, blame me. How can we use our talents, what the abilities and passions and interests that we have for God?
And so let's start off with this. Thomas is a very talented person.
Thank you.
And, well, he does, like, programming stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
And so, I guess, have you given much thought into, like, what you could do with that?
I have given some, but I've had struggles with actually knowing how or what to do specifically.
Yeah.
Aside from, oh, I could make a program or a game that has something to do with the Bible, but that's not a very good, solution.
I kind of have a feeling that eventually you're gonna like figure like you're gonna have like light bulb go off in your head. Or maybe not. Maybe it'll be more gradual, but like realize, oh, this is what I could do. It encompasses both my talents and serves God.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I hope that happens to you, and I feel like it probably will.
Yeah, sometimes that's how it is.
That's how it was with me. Like when I first got into videography, I had no idea that it was. At first, that was just gonna be a hobby. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and a little while later, I started like thinking like I hope this can eventually be turned into something I can use just for God. And I think I might have prayed about it some because I wanted my talents to meet my drive or my passion, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, I mean, it is a little bit already, and I'm starting to see now like other ways that it can happen, like, and it has happened already a little bit. Like I use my talent for videography to serve God, and I feel like it's going to happen more. So,
Right. So right now I'm in kind of a weird position where, like, I have a degree in computer science. I know how to program and do a lot of technical things,
yeah,
but I am not fully sure how I can use that. And so, like you said, I've been praying for a way that I can use my unique gifts. And in the meantime, I'm actually using other gifts that I have, nothing to do with programming or computer science, but
yeah,
things that I can do, passions that I have aside from that I can use, like for this channel or for a youth group or things like that.
his ability to write scripts and talk to a camera.
I don't know if that's necessarily much of a talent of mine. It's something I'm doing. I don't know if it's a talent, or maybe it's not a really great talent.
Well, you're working on it.
So let's actually read some scriptures on this, because there are several passages that deal specifically with this idea of how we can use for starters, yes, we should use our unique talents for Christ, and we should be looking for ways to do that, and also kind of how we can do it. So I'll read the first one. It's Romans 12, verses 4 through 8. Actually, I'm going to start with verse 3. So Romans 12:3. For through the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment, as God has allotted to each a measure of faith. So we've each got our own measure. And then continuing with that thought, for just as we have many members in one body, and all the members do not have the same function, so we who are many are one body in Christ, and individually members one of another. Since we have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, each of us is to exercise them accordingly. If prophecy, according to the proportion of his faith; if service, in his serving; or he who teaches, in his teaching; or he who exhorts, in his exhortation; or he who gives, with liberality; he who leads, with diligence; he who shows mercy, with cheerfulness. So the highlight of that passage, I think, is since we have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, each of us is to exercise them accordingly.
Yeah.
And in the passage, it's talking about like prophecy and serving and teaching. Those are some of the examples of the gifts it gives, but I think this applies to just any gift, any skill or passion that we could have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, yeah, you could add anything to that list, but it's basically the gist of it is God has given you the ability to do things or the passion to do things, and you should use that for God. Whether He has blessed you with riches or generosity, you should do that for God. Whether He's blessed you with the ability to speak in front of people,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, anything He's given you the ability to do, and so that could apply to us. If He's given you the passion for coding,
Or videography.
or videography,
You don't know how to pronounce it.
Um, and so that's the
And I think the main thing to think about here is, or something to think about. A lot of Christians fall into the idea that the serving and the doing things for Christ is something that is for just certain people. It's just a few people to do, right?
oh yeah.
Like a lot of people think that it's the preacher's job, or that's the job of the elders, or if the church has deacons, that's the job of the deacons to do. But then most of the congregation, their role is to sit in church and be fed,
Maybe tithe a little bit.
and maybe tithe a little bit. But this passage and some of the other ones we go through, they contradict that. There are several specific people who are using their ability to teach or preach or lead for the church for Christ. This, when you think of it this way, where everyone has their own unique gifts
Yeah.
and everyone should use them, then all of a sudden every member of the church is now a valuable part of the body of Christ
Yeah.
with its own unique function.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one thing that's good for us to think about, because a lot of people think that, oh, well, I'm not good at public speaking. I'm not charismatic. I don't know how to get up and talk to people talk in front of people, or I don't know how to teach, or I couldn't lead a small group, or I couldn't do all these other things. They think because I can't do that, then I'll just do nothing. But that's not necessarily how you should do it, right? Everyone has some ability somewhere.
Yeah.
And this lists serving. Serving is pretty generic and vague. What can serving be? You could be doing any number of things. Jesus washed the disciples' feet. Washing dishes. That could be seen as equivalent, right? I don't know. That's something I want to hit on, really, because we are all called to work for Christ. It's not Christianity, and the church is not a passive thing. You can't sit and be fed, because that's just not that's not what the church is supposed to be.
Yeah. And I think another thing I want to take from this is that it seems like some people might have, like, a hobby or a skilled or really skilled at something, and then they have their church persona. Like at church, they might do these things, but outside of church, they have like this fun hobby, or they have like they're really skilled at this one thing. Those should not be separate.
Or they don't have to be separate.
If you're really skilled at something, I mean, you can bring that in. You can use that skill for God. It doesn't have to be in the church building. It could be doing something totally.
Mm-hmm.
So like, yeah, just because your skill doesn't translate into something you can do on a Sunday morning does not mean it's not valuable.
Right. And it might not necessarily be a skill that actually you would think contributes to serving Christ, but maybe it puts you in a position where you can make an impact and share your faith, essentially. Which, what I think of for that is Patrick Mahomes. Is that his name?
I don't know.
Why am I getting my name mixed up? I should know this. Yeah, Mahomes, the quarterback for the Chiefs.
Oh, yeah.
So something he'll do is when they first run out onto the field, he goes to the end zone and he kneels and prays.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's on national television. So that's an example of football. Like,
How does that relate?
How in the world can you use football to be a better Christian and to serve Christ? But he's found a way, not necessarily to, he's not teaching people, he's not serving people, but he's just demonstrating that, this is a thing that I do. Like, he's standing up for his faith in a way that
people can see.
He's using his position that his skill as football player put him in to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really neat to see.
Yeah. Another example I think of when we talk about this is, so you might, if you have like a passion or a skill or you're working a type of career, any of that can be used for God. Like, the founder of Operation Underground Railroad, pretty sure that's Christian organization. Well, kind of. I don't know if it is really or not. I think the guy's a Christian. Yeah, the guy's definitely a Christian. Pretty sure.
He's not really that sure.
I don't know him that well. Watched a couple videos of him a while back. He was like a detective and whatnot, working for the U.S. government, and he didn't feel like he used that same skill to later start like the biggest slave release program in the U.S. or the biggest independent one, I guess. And that's an example of like your skill may not translate to something on a Sunday morning, but you may have a talent that is instrumental in serving God.
Mm-hmm.
And so like any like modern job of today could be part of something really big that God uses.
Mm-hmm. Anything. So I wish I had more examples, but the point being, no matter what, you have some sort of skill somewhere. It can be used.
Mm-hmm.
I know of...
And it could be in a church planting, or it could be like making a company that does something.
Starting a movement or a charity or something like that, yeah.
Or it could be as a missionary, or it could be, I don't know, some sort of outreach. It doesn't have to be, there's no like boundaries for this.
Well, I have some friends who have used their skills as artists or graphic designers to create art with, Bible verses or art that went through the birth of Christ and things like that. I've seen people who were really extroverted and outgoing and really loved people go to other countries and try to develop relationships with, the people there with from other faiths, from other countries. So examples like that,
yeah,
anything.
Like graphic design is not something you typically think of as like a outreach thing, but like, see, that's an example.
Yeah, and or engineers, civil engineers. I know of one who really wants to go to Germany to be a missionary there, and use his skill as a civil engineer to not only help people in that, but also to
get himself in,
kind of. But I've known of other engineers who have gone and built aquaponics and water systems for villages in, remote parts of the Himalayas, and that gives them food and fresh water and things, things like this. You may never think that an engineer or a graphic designer could use that skill to serve Christ, but I guess it's a matter of, if you pray about it and you think and you earnestly try to find a way, you will eventually find a way that you can use your talents for Christ.
Mm-hmm. And so like there's this conception that some people might have that, if you want to serve God, then you can go into ministry. Yeah, that's not how that works.
It's that if you want to do it, you have to you should become a preacher, or you should become a missionary yourself who teaches people.
Yeah, if you want to serve God with your life, okay, then you can go to a missions, or you can go to a Bible college. It's like, that's okay. So you graduate high school. What do you want to do with your life? Oh, I want to serve God. Okay, go to Bible college. It's like,
it's not always the case.
It's not how that works.
And preachers are needed. That's something some people are called to do, but not everyone is really fit or has the skills that would make a good preacher.
Yeah,
not everyone's good at public speaking.
And like we were saying, if everybody in the church should be using their talents for God, then obviously not everybody's gonna be a preacher. So
right.
And everybody in the church should be using their talents for God. Mm-hmm. So only a small percentage of those people will be preaching. A large portion of them will be doing something else.
Just by definition, because if we're all preaching, then things don't really work out.
It'd
be weird. Who'd be there to listen to the preachers?
They would take turns.
I suppose that could work in ways. But we should all use our God-given talents for God. Big surprise. And speaking of talents...
And all talents are God-given.
All talents are God-given. So everyone has something they can do. But speaking of talents, Matthew chapter 25, the parable of the talents, which I know talents was a
Money.
Was money. It was a measurement of money. But the word is talents.
Yeah.
It's kind of not hard not to make the connection to where certain people were given a certain number of talents and then they were judged at the end based on how well they used those talents.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard not to make that connection. So in the story, it is talking about talents, the measurement of money, but it's equally applicable to other things that God has given us. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the story, there's a master about to go on a journey, and he calls his slaves, and he entrusts his possessions to them, essentially. Mm-hmm. And he gives to one of them 5 talents, one of them 2 talents. Hold on.
I thought it was 10, 5, and 1.
No, it's 5, 2, and 1.
Oh.
That's what he initially gives them. He gives one of his slaves 5 talents, 1, 2, and 1, 1. And then he goes away on this journey. And the ones with the 5 talents and the 2 talents, they're smart, and they immediately go and they invest them and they trade them and they use those talents and
do the day trading stuff.
They do day trading, or they invest them in a bank or something, and they double them. Yeah, so the one who had 5, he gained 5 more, so then he had 10. The one who had 2 gained 2 more, and then he had 4. But then there was the one who was given 1 talent, and he was scared of his master. So he immediately went away and hid it he dug a hole in the ground and hid it. He hid his master's money. Mm-hmm. So when the master eventually returned, and he calls his slaves to have them give an account for how they have used the talents that he gave them and how well they have kind of stewarded his money. And to the first 2 who went out and doubled their money, he says, you did a good job. He says, essentially, I can't find it.
Well done.
Well done, good and faithful slave, which is what we want to hear from God in the end. You were faithful in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. So if you haven't also noticed, the master is supposed to be God, and we are the slaves. So he says that to the first 2, but to the third one, and the one who had received the 1 talent came up and said, Master, I knew you would be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. And I was afraid and went away and hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is yours. Which is just saying, hey, look, I didn't lose your money. That's all he could really say. But his master answered and said to him, You wicked, lazy slave. You knew that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have put my money in the bank, and on my arrival I would have received my money back with interest. Therefore take away the talent from him, and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he does have will be taken away. Throw out the worthless slave into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So that's also a pretty stern warning.
Yeah. One thing that I get out of this is that not everybody is going to be blessed with the same level of talents or money or riches or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the point of the matter is not how much we have, is that we do use it.
Right.
So just because you don't have not nearly as talented as somebody else doesn't mean you shouldn't use your talent you do have.
Right. So nowhere in this story is there any comparison between the multiple slaves, other than the 2 did a good job and the other did a bad job.
Yeah, the one that had 1 talent wasn't expected to make 5.
Right. So the master, when he sees the one who had 2 and then got 2 more, he's not like, well, the first guy he made 5 talents while I was gone. Why did you only make 2? Like he wasn't angry at him for that, because he did used what he had.
Yeah.
And to the effect that he had, and he still doubled it, even though he didn't make as much in total than the one who had the 5 talents. So the point is not comparing yourself to others and saying, oh man, I'm not as talented as that guy. I can't do as much as that guy. The point is, here's what I have. What am I going to do with it?
Exactly.
That is the bottom line that we all have to ask ourselves. This story is talking about a master and slaves that he gives some money. The parallel, the purpose of the parable is there is God and there is us, his children, and he has given us all talents. He has given us all abilities and passions and opportunities. How are we going to use them?
Mm-hmm.
And so in the end, he's going to ask for us to give an account of how we have used our talents. And he's not going to be comparing us to other people. He is going to be looking at us and us alone, one at a time, you know?
Yeah.
And he's going to see what we did. And for the person who just sat by and was like, I was scared because I knew you could be angry and you could be a harsh man. You could be harsh at some time. And so I just did nothing with the talents you gave me. He's not going to be happy with that.
No.
The warning here at the end is very stern. Throw out the worthless slave into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's not like a light punishment.
Yeah.
The parallel is you'll get thrown into hell if you don't properly use what you've been given.
Yeah, and then it comes back to everything that we have has been given to us by God. And so if we don't use it, then we're not being good stewards.
Mm-hmm.
And with that could be talents, abilities, it could be money, it could be opportunities, it could be connections. I mean, it could be anything.
Yeah.
And we should be using what we have been given to serve God. And if we don't, we're wasting we're wasting what God has given us,
Mm-hmm.
which is being a bad steward, which is something God doesn't like.
And so, like I guess I said at the beginning of when we were talking about this, using our talents for God, I don't fully know how to use some of my talents or skills yet for God. I've been thinking about it. I've been trying to find ways, and I've been praying about it. So I don't think it's a matter of you have to know from the very get-go, but you should be seeking. You should be trying to think of ways that you can use your possessions and your money and your skills for God. And
I feel like this. I was in the same boat you were in like 2 years ago. Like I wanted to do videography, but I wasn't really sure how I could use that for God. And now I am starting a little bit, and I have a pretty clear path forward,
mm-hmm.
or somewhat clear path forward. And it's like that really played out in hindsight.
Yep.
And so I hope that happens to you too. And it could be, I don't know how the timeline is unclear, but
right. And in the meantime, it's not like I'm just
sitting doing nothing.
Sitting on my hands. I'm using my other talents. The other.
Yeah.
My limited public speaking ability.
Yeah, and this has been something that over the last couple of years, I've grown to like have prioritize my faith more, and so, like this summer, I had this like inkling to get back into like airplanes and flying and stuff,
mm-hmm.
and I've been struggling with, this seems like it's just purely for fun, and I don't know if I want to do something that's just purely for fun. But then I was just thinking, like, I mean, God could use this later. Maybe he's calling me to do this, and then later, they're like, oh, I can do something with this that serve God.
And for the meantime, you can just be happy and enjoy something that God gave you to enjoy.
Yeah.
Which could later you have no idea how work to something even greater.
Yeah, and because I mean, I wouldn't have imagined 2 years ago that videography would work out this way, so I should have the same faith for anything else I do.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully other people have that faith too, is that whatever they do can be used for God. But that doesn't mean you should just do anything. You should, I don't know. That doesn't mean you can just go into anything and expect in. The point is you should probably still be wise with what you do, but, or...
Yeah. You should at least ask yourself, is this a good idea to do this?
Yeah.
Another thing, so I don't know where the verse is, but somewhere it says something to the effect of, to the one who has been given much, much will be required.
Yeah.
And that applies to everything. Nothing specific. It's not money or talents. It could just be mental faculties. Maybe to the person who has much wisdom and intelligence, or who has been exposed to a lot of scriptures, they will will be required of them, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another thing to think about is the person who was given a lot of talents should probably use a lot of talents to greater effect.
Yeah.
Like what if the person with 5 talents had come back and he had maybe only gained 1? Like, maybe that would still be good enough, but at the same time, he should have been able to do more, right?
I think part of the point of that is with higher with higher more gifts comes more responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Like God is not just willy nilly handing out talents and money and whatnot. If He gives you more, that's probably because He wants you to use more.
Right, and that's the hard thing for when you consider the ramifications is like us growing up in a first world country and like you and me growing up in a Christian family being exposed from a super early age to the gospel. We have to think, okay, we were given that, and that's a pretty big gift.
Mm-hmm.
We have to act in accordance to that. And some people weren't given that, and they're still doing more, you know? So then that's the thing to think about is, and it's a little bit humbling and maybe a little bit frightening, I think, for me, to think, like, you know, I was given a pretty ideal situation in life, speaking physically, maybe speaking spiritually. So what am I going to do to use that position to the effect that I should use it? And, oh man, I had another thing I was going to say. I always forget. I forget things sometimes. Use your talents wisely.
Yeah. I'll read 1 Peter 4, 7 through 11.
7-Eleven.
7-11. The end of all things is near. Therefore, be alert and be sober of mind, so that you may pray. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gifts you have received to serve others, as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, they should do so as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To Him be the glory and power forever and ever. Amen.
So I like the way this passage starts out with a kind of somber reminder. The end of all things is near. Yeah. Therefore, be alert and sober mind so that you may pray. And then it goes into talking about how we should use whatever gift we have received to serve others.
Mm-hmm. It says here, the gifts we received for God, we should use for God, and by the grace God has given us.
Mm-hmm.
If we speak, we should use God's words.
I should speak as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides. And so I like that as well, because for each of those, it is attributing it all to God. Mm-hmm. It's like, yes, I was given some ability in speaking, so I'm going to speak with the speech that comes from God, with the if I'm going to serve, I'm going to serve with the strength that God provides me. And
it's kind of like how when the disciples did miracles, they are always careful to make sure they didn't take the credit upon themselves.
Mm-hmm.
This is a gift that God had given them, and it came from God. God did the miracle through them.
Right.
It's the same thing.
And so we were given gifts, not necessarily the ability to do miracles, but
it's all on the same line.
We're given, we can do wonderful things if we use our gifts properly. Something I think about is what if, take your typical church congregation. I don't know how many people it has. I don't know what the average is.
A lot.
Let's say it has 50 to 100 people.
That's median.
Medium?
Okay, so there's let's not get into math, never mind.
Okay, whatever. Let's say, however many people your church has. Imagine if every one of those people was actively and intentionally and in a devoted way using their unique skills to further God's kingdom and to bring glory to God and spread the gospel. Mm-hmm. What if everyone was using their unique gifts and using their unique positions to do that? Think how much good a single church could even do.
Yeah.
Because
52,
even a smaller church has that's like the number of people as a small company or a small organization or something. And in there, you're going to have people who are good at various forms of technology or speaking or writing or music, all these different passions and skills and interests. If everyone was using those, not necessarily in the, together, but in their own ways, think how much good would be done.
Yeah.
And then consider like a mega church. So you have thousands of people. What if it's like an army at that point? What if everyone was doing that? Things would look a lot different, I think. Instead, we let a handful of people do everything.
Yeah, it's kind of like what you're going back to what you said earlier. Is like most of the people just sit there and be fed. Well, a couple people do things.
Right.
It's not how it should work.
Like
everybody should be doing things. It doesn't all have to be on the Sunday morning, but everybody should be doing something.
Exactly. It's not the, and I guess here we have to put the disclaimer that it's not our own actions that are going to save us or get us into heaven. It's only by God's grace that can happen. But if we believe in God and if we've been given that grace, shouldn't we naturally want to serve Him? Shouldn't that be the natural response, is that we were given all this, now I want to give my life back? Like, it's not necessarily a requirement for salvation, but it's what we should want to do. It's what He expects of us.
Yeah.
We should all contribute to His cause.
And going to like not by works. It's not by works because some people can do very little and get into heaven. Some people can do a lot, like kind of like the parable of the laborers.
Mm-hmm.
But it is by that you did work for God, that you did serve Him.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you served Him for 1 year because you were baptized 1 year before you died, or if you served Him for 80 years because you were baptized 80 years before you died. Either way, if you were serving Him, then God requires obedience and requires that we are devoted to Him, and part of being devoted to Him is serving Him.
And so once we believe in Him and have made that choice to follow Him, then from that moment on, we are kind of obligated to use our talents for Him.
Yeah, and so it's not by works, because obviously the person with 80 that spent like 60 years as a Christian is not going to have 60 times more treasure in heaven. Well, maybe, but I don't think that's how it works.
Who knows?
But the person that spent 1 year serving God and the person that spent 60 years serving God are both getting the same prize. So it's not by works in that regard, but it is by works because if you don't work for God, then you're not really a Christian.
Well, yeah, if you become a Christian and then you don't use your talents, then you're being the guy, the slave who was given the one talent. You're just hiding them. And so whether or not you were initially saved, this parable is very clear on what happens to what God will do to people who do not properly use what has been given them.
Yeah.
So we should keep that in mind and know that we should all want to find our own way. We're all kind of like a piece in the puzzle, and we need to find our place in the giant, massive, multi-million piece jigsaw puzzle that is Christ's church.
Yeah, the army that's on earth. Yeah, and then a lot of that just comes down to trusting God and constantly seeking after what your peace is.
Mm-hmm. And praying.
Right.
When you can't see it yourself necessarily. And then maybe it'll eventually come along.
Yeah.
But it's a good thing to think about, for sure. Because I don't know. What's the statistic? I want to know what the statistic for how many Christians there are in America, or people who confess to be Christians. So, according to a survey done by the Pew Research Center, 65% of American adults describe themselves as Christian.
Oh, wow.
So, but that's just people who describe themselves as Christian.
Yeah, which can mean a wide variety of things.
That includes a lot of people who say they're Christian and then have never, pretty much ever gone to church.
They believe in a higher being because they want to go to heaven after they die.
So that's about 167 million. Now, I think it would be safe to say that if 167 million people in America were living like they followed Christ and trying to follow His example, the country would look significantly different. So I think that number is probably a little bit
We would not
optimistic.
have morality issues here.
This is true. That's
Because
67%.
yeah, if 67% of people lived like Christ, this country would be a very moral place. Very, very moral.
So
you can't have wide swaths of crime and stuff if 67% of people are Christians.
yeah. So okay, I don't think that's a very good statistic.
But it's
Let's
hard
assume half of that. Even that might be optimistic. Let's say there's 70 million people in America who are Christians. What if actually all of them started living like it? Or what? Okay, maybe what if all of the 140 or 50 million people who describe themselves as Christians, what if they all actually lived like it and were using their abilities for Christ? That's over half the population of the United States. So there's a thing to think about is, since there are not 67% of American adults are not doing that, we can know pretty well that they're not. If they claim to be Christians and they do more, they're not. Their actions aren't lining up.
Yeah.
But that's the thing to think about is, no matter what the numbers actually are, we should all be living a certain way, and if we're not living that way, then the natural effect of that is that the country is not going to look like we're living that way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. The
Statistics.
Statistical rant right there. I need water.
After that long talking spree.
I talk too much.
Yeah, that's kind of what happens with these events.
These events.
These podcasts.
So, the point in the end, which I think is the thing I would want to get across to all of you watching or listening, is that obviously we all have our own talents. If you don't think that you have any talents or any abilities, then you're wrong. You're just flat up wrong. You have something that you can do better than somebody else. Somewhere. I don't know what that is.
It doesn't necessarily be better, but you just have to do it.
Well, something you're good at doing that you're probably better than someone else in the world at doing it.
Yeah, sure.
I'm just gonna say that.
Okay.
Sure. So you all have talents, and you should all be using them. Basically, that's the synopsis wrapped up into as simple as I can make it. If we as Christians lived that way, some pretty amazing things would happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the thing I would like to do, I guess, is just pray that everyone watching this, and then us as well, would be searching to find ways that we can use our talents, and then doing them. That would be the thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you should be praying for as well. Any other closing thoughts?
Well, this has been a great episode. Oh, by the way, this is a special one because this is episode 10, which means we've been doing it for 10 weeks, and we're basically podcast experts at this point.
Oh, totally.
So
we know everything we're doing. We've gotten our setup time down
to just about an hour.
That's like down like 30% from last week. No, in all seriousness, 10th podcast.
Small big milestone.
We attribute that as being significant because we count by 10, and that's the only reason.
Yeah, and it's 100% of the podcasts we've done.
Just gonna leave that there. So, we talked about a couple of videos today. We talked about using our talents, and we should all be wanting to use those talents because we should all be wanting to be the kind of Christians that the Bible describes for us. We should all be wanting to be flavorful and salty. So go and be salty.